Denver paid $85 million just to make a quarterback go away, and that quarterback's name was Russell Wilson. That stood as the largest dead cap hit in the history of the NFL for a few seasons, and the check went to a guy who finished 11-19 over 2 years. He never touched the playoffs and somehow turned into a national meme before he even took a snap in a real game for them. We're gonna break down every piece of this mess, from the Seattle fallout that nobody really explained, to the blockbuster trade and the 2 years of pure chaos that followed. Before we look at the wreckage in Denver, we have to look at Russell Wilson's entire career at that point, because the revisionist history on his career is insane. Some fans want to act like he was never actually elite, but they're just wrong. Russ made 9 Pro Bowls in 10 seasons with Seattle and walked away with the Super Bowl ring. He actually piled up more wins through his first 10 seasons than any other quarterback in the history of the league. When you look at his prime, it showed a player who could do things most guys simply couldn't. He would scramble to extend plays until a lane opened up downfield, buying time with his feet before launching a 50-yard bomb that landed right in the bucket. He won games with a defense-first roster and often dealt with minimal offensive support, yet he kept winning anyway. The eye test on prime Russell Wilson was easy because the man was just special. The real question was never about his talent, but whether the relationship with the Seattle Seahawks could actually be saved. By the time 2021 rolled around, the answer was a clear no. That season, a finger injury created the first visible crack in the foundation. He missed games for the first time in his career and looked diminished when he returned, finishing the year 6-8 with the team that was clearly heading toward a transition. While the on-field struggle was obvious, reports from The Athletic later claimed that Wilson actually went to Seahawks ownership to push for the firing of Pete Carroll and John Schneider. Wilson denied those claims on social media, tweeting that he loved Pete and John, but the organization had already started planning a future without him. There's one specific detail from 2018 that tells you everything you need to know about how bad things had become. Seahawks GM John Schneider showed up at Josh Allen's pro day in Wyoming, and as soon as Wilson's camp found out, they called the team to demand answers. Schneider had been totally open about being there, even talking about it on the radio. But Russ's people wanted to know why their GM was scouting a top 5 quarterback prospect. That single phone call shows the dynamic perfectly. Seattle was exploring their options while Wilson's camp watched every move. And the truth is that neither side trusted the other anymore. When Wilson's agent finally leaked a list of 4 teams he would accept a trade to, the situation was officially over. The Broncos just didn't realize they were the ones about to pay the price. In March of 2022, the Denver Broncos decided they were done waiting for a savior and decided to swing for the fences in Russell Wilson. I remember exactly where I was because I was at like this vegan restaurant with my mom or something like that. And I remember looking on Twitter because I refreshed the page and I said, "Oh my God." And then everybody looked at me. And then I said, "Russell Wilson got traded." And then nobody cared. And I realized I wasn't in the right place and I never went back to that restaurant ever again. The Broncos sent over 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 5th rounder, and 3 established players in Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant. What they got back was Russell Wilson and a 4th-round pick that eventually turned into nothing at all. When you look at the math, Denver traded 5 draft picks and 3 starters for a single quarterback, which is the kind of move that either builds a statue or gets everyone fired. The thing is, almost everyone in the league thought this move made perfect sense, including myself at the time. Denver's Super Bowl odds shifted from 25-1 to 12-1 the moment the news broke, and sports media outlets were handing out A grades like they were participation trophies. The city was buzzing because the logic behind the move actually held up under the microscope. The Broncos already had a top-tier defense and a receiving core featuring Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, not to mention a young star and running back Javonte Williams. Since Peyton Manning retired after the 2015 season, the only thing this roster lacked was a high-level quarterback to steer the ship. The front office had spent 7 years trapped in quarterback purgatory while cycling through names like Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Case Keenum, and Joe Flacco. None of those guys could hold the job for long, so when a 9-time Pro Bowler with a ring comes available, George Paton didn't blink before pulling the trigger. You can actually defend the trade itself because it was an aggressive play for a roster that looked like it was ready to win right now. The draft capital was expensive, but the window was open and the team needed a leader who had been to the mountaintop before. What you cannot defend, however, is the massive mistake Peyton made immediately after the trade was finalized. Russ still had a full 2 years left on his existing contract from Seattle, which gave Denver plenty of time to see how he fit the system. The patient move would have been to let him play a season, evaluate the product on the field, and then talk about a long-term deal. Instead, the team handed him a 5-year extension worth $245 million. They locked in a historic amount of guaranteed money based on who Russ used to be in Seattle rather than who he was in the present. That extension is the original sin of this era because it stripped the Broncos of every ounce of leverage they had. Once that ink dried on the paper, they couldn't bench him without destroying their salary cap for years to come. They were stuck with Russell Wilson regardless of how he played, and as we all found out very quickly, the play on the field was a disaster. Even before the first kickoff, the Broncos country, let's ride, press conference started making the rounds for all the wrong reasons. Wilson brought this high energy, performative vibe to the podium that only works if you're winning games every Sunday. Shout out Jalen Hurts. Fans thought it was charming or maybe just a bit quirky at first, but it quickly turned into a meme that defined one of the worst stretches in the history of the franchise. The defense was doing its part with Payton SZN and an insane pass rush, but all that talent on defense was wasted because the offense couldn't move the ball. When Denver hired Nathaniel Hackett in January 2022, they were taking a massive gamble on a guy who had never been a head coach before. He had a great reputation as an offensive coordinator in Green Bay, but calling plays for Aaron Rodgers is a world away from running an entire NFL organization. GM George Payton brought him in anyway, mostly because Hackett had a great relationship with Wilson and was supposed to be a brilliant offensive mind. The plan was for Nat Hackett to build a custom system that let the quarterback cook, while the defense shut down the rest of the league. The reality was that Hackett essentially handed Wilson the keys to the entire building and never bothered to ask for them back. Reports started leaking about a very weird dynamic where the head coach deferred to the quarterback on almost every major offensive decision. Russ's personal support staff was given access to the facility in a way that rubbed veteran players the wrong way and undermined the coaching staff's authority. Everything came to a head in week 1 when Wilson returned to Seattle to face his old team in front of a hostile crowd. The game was a tight struggle that came down to the final minute, and that's when Hackett made a decision that will live in coaching infamy forever. Nat Hackett chose to kick a 64-yard field goal instead of letting his $245 million quarterback try to pick up 5 yards. Brandon McManus missed the kick and Denver lost, and Peyton Manning and Shannon Sharpe looked absolutely horrified while watching from the Manning cast. That opening loss set the tone for a season where the offense looked completely broken and out of sync. Russ finished the year with a career-high 55 sacks and a dismal 84.4 passer rating, while the offense as a whole finished dead last in the league in scoring. Things got so bad at Mile High that fans started loudly chanting the play clock because the team kept getting hit with delayed game penalties. At one point in the season, Denver actually had the best scoring defense in the NFL and the worst scoring offense at the exact same time. The worst Thursday night football game also happened during this season, but the lowest point of the entire year didn't even happen during a play, but rather on the sideline during a game. Defensive lineman Mike Purcell was called by camera screaming directly into Wilson's face while the quarterback just stood there and took it. You didn't need a microphone to know that the defense was fed up with an offense that couldn't score a touchdown to save their lives. It wasn't just a heated moment between teammates, it was the visual proof that the locker room had stopped believing in their leader. Nat Hackett didn't even make it through their first full year before the front office fired him after just 15 games. He left with a 4-11 record, making his stay the shortest non-interim coaching tenure in the long history of the Denver Broncos. After a humiliating 51-14 loss to the Rams on Christmas Day, the team realized they had to do something drastic to save their investment. They decided the only answer was to go get Sean Payton, but that move was going to cost them even more than what they had already lost. Hiring Sean Payton was not a cheap fix for the Denver Broncos at all. To even get the Saints to let him out of his contract, Denver had to cough up a first-round pick, which came right on top of a massive haul of talent and picks they had already shipped off to Seattle for Russell Wilson. The front office was essentially burning fresh draft capital to try and salvage the wreckage from the last time they burned draft capital. But if you're looking at a coach to fix a problem for a quarterback, Payton was the gold standard. He had spent over a decade turning Drew Brees into a first-ballot Hall of Famer, and his understanding of offensive spacing was light years beyond anything Nat Hackett had shown. From the second he stepped into the facility, Payton made it clear that the old way of doing things was over. The most immediate change involved Wilson's personal team of private coaches and trainers who had been given free roam access to the building under the previous staff. During his first press conference, Sean didn't mince words when he told reporters that having outside staff in the facility was foreign to him, and he wouldn't allow that to be happening on his watch. This wasn't just a change in policy, it was a public shot across the bow before the team had even put pads on for training camp. Sean was intentionally drawing a line in the sand to separate his professional operation from the player-centric circus he had inherited. For a brief window in early 2023, it actually looked like the gamble might pay off. Wilson started the year with 26 touchdowns against only 8 interceptions. The team even managed to string together a 5-game winning streak. For the first time in a long time, the city of Denver felt like it could finally breathe again. However, the Week 3 nightmare against the Miami Dolphins stayed in the back of everyone's mind like a dark cloud. Miami hung 70 on the Broncos in a single afternoon, and seeing a professional NFL defense give up 10 touchdowns in 60 minutes was a pretty historic embarrassment. While the scoreboard reflected a defensive collapse, the loss exposed just how thin the roster actually really was under the surface. You simply can't give up 70 points in a regular season game and pretend the foundation of your team is solid. As the season went on, the game started to tell a much more frustrating story than the box score suggested. Wilson had spent his entire career playing a very specific style of football that relied on deep shots and sideline throws while almost completely ignoring the middle of the field. Payton's system required the exact opposite, demanding a point guard who could process reads quickly and hit the check down to keep the chains moving. The film sessions reportedly became a repetitive loop of missed opportunities where open receivers over the middle were ignored while Wilson held the ball too long, waiting for a miracle. Sean had promised to build the offense around what Wilson did best, but by the middle of the season, his patience with that approach was clearly running out. The relationship finally hit the point of no return during the Week 9 bye. Denver's front office approached Wilson's camp about moving the vesting date on a $37 million injury guarantee that was scheduled to lock in the following March. They wanted more time to decide if he was their long-term guy, but Russ claimed that the team threatened to bench him if he didn't waive that financial protection. He stood his ground and refused to budge. While the Broncos tried to frame it as a standard business negotiation, Russ walked away feeling like the team had already decided he was a disposable asset. Payton finally pulled the plug. With 2 games left in the playoffs out of reach, Wilson was forced to watch from the sidelines while Jarrett Stidham took over the offense. While Wilson's camp saw it as a move driven by the contract dispute. In the end, the why didn't really matter because the result was a total disaster. A QB who cost $245 million was sitting on the bench, and the franchise that gave up its entire future to get him was now staring at the consequences. In March of 2024, the Denver Broncos officially told Russell Wilson his time in Denver was over. The final tally for the trade was 2 seasons, 11 wins, 19 losses, and 0 trips to the postseason. Because of the way his massive contract extension was written, cutting him didn't actually save the team money in the short term. In fact, it created a financial hole so deep it threatened to swallow the entire organization. The team was forced to swallow an $85 million dead cap hit, which they decided to split into $53 million for 2024 and $32 million in 2025. To put those numbers into perspective, the Broncos were paying more than 20% of their total salary cap to a guy playing now for the Pittsburgh Steelers. While rookie Bo Nix was trying to learn the playbook on a cheap contract, the front office was writing a $53 million check to the man he replaced. This wasn't just a bad move by the front office, it was a total financial catastrophe that limited every single roster move the team could make for 2 straight years. Wilson eventually signed a 1-year deal with the Seattle Seahawks for the league minimum. The same player who had just pocketed $124 million from Denver was essentially working for free by NFL standards just a few months later. It was a jarring reminder of how fast the league moves, as his market value completely evaporated once he no longer had guaranteed money backing him up. When Wilson posted his goodbye message to Denver, the omission spoke much louder than the words on the page. He made sure to thank his teammates, the fans, the cafeteria staff, and the player development VP by name. However, Sean Payton and George Payton were nowhere to be found on the statement, and the ownership group didn't get a mention either. You could call it a classy exit, but it was clearly a calculated move by a man who knew exactly who he wanted to snub on his way out the door. The contrast between the two teams involved in a trade only got sharper once the dust settled. Geno Smith took over the starting job in Seattle immediately after the trade and won Comeback Player of the Year during Wilson's first season in Denver. It's wild to think that the journeyman backup the Seattle Seahawks used as a bridge ended up having a career year while Wilson was hitting rock bottom. Seattle didn't just survive the trade, they thrived without him. Even worse for Denver was what Seattle did with all those extra draft picks, drafting left tackle Charles Cross and pass rusher Boye Mafe to anchor the lines. They added Kenneth Walker at running back and found a superstar corner in Devon Witherspoon, who made the Pro Bowl in each of his first 3 seasons. Then there was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who led the league in receiving in 2025 and took home Offensive Player of the Year. Those 5 players became the heart of a Seattle roster that eventually marched their way and won their way in the Super Bowl. Denver didn't just lose the trade, they literally paid for the championship run of the team that fleeced them. When you add up the total damage, the Russell Wilson era cost Denver 2 first-round picks, 2 seconds, a fifth, 3 veteran players, and another first-round pick for Sean Payton. On top of the picks, they paid out $124 million in cash and still owe $85 million in dead cap space. All of that for 2 years of losing football and a locker room that never seemed to fully get behind their leader. The Broncos were left standing in the ruins of the biggest trade in NFL history, with almost no resources left to fix the mess. The story takes a genuinely strange turn here because the Broncos didn't actually collapse. They rebuilt the roster, and you could argue they did a better job than they ever would have if the Russell Wilson trade never happened in the first place. The Walter Penner Group closed on their $4.65 billion purchase of the team in August of 2022, which was just 6 months after the trade went through, and they made it clear from day one that nobody was allowed to use dead money as an excuse for losing. Greg Penner, one of the owners, told everyone that his only job was putting the best football team on the field every single year, regardless of the financial constraints. It sounds great in a press conference, but trying to compete while living inside a $53 million cap hit is a completely different animal. They decided to do it anyway. The defense basically carried the entire organization during those 2 years of massive dead cap hits. Pat SZN had already proven he was the best corner in the league, and by the time 2025 rolled around, he had won Defensive Player of the Year in 2024. Nick Bonito also stepped up that same season to lead the entire NFL in sacks. The Broncos had quietly put together one of the most suffocating defenses in the AFC while the offense was still trying to find its identity, and that unit kept them in games when the cap situation meant they couldn't afford any big names in free agency. The offense found their answer in the 2024 draft. Denver would select Bo Nix 12th overall out of Oregon. Sean Payton was the one who pushed the hardest for Nix behind the scenes, and the young quarterback rewarded that faith immediately. He finished his first year with 29 touchdown passes, which is the second highest total for a rookie in the history of the NFL. The offense had been a national punchline for 2 straight years, but suddenly they had a guy who could process the field quickly and run the system at the exact speed Payton wanted. While Wilson's final year in Denver forced him to pay $22 million just for him to be on the active roster, Nix played for a tiny fraction of that price and actually played better football. That massive gap between cheap rookie contract and high-level production is the most valuable thing you can have in the modern NFL, and Broncos finally had it. Every single dollar they saved on Nix went right back into the rest of the team. They were handing out massive guarantees to their core players at the exact same time they were eating $85 million in dead cap money from the Russell Wilson deal. Denver finally ended an 8-year playoff drought in 2024 before turning around and going 14-3 the following year. They won the AFC West and fought their way all the way to the AFC Championship game. The same franchise that was a league-wide warning sign just 3 years earlier had transformed into one of the best run teams in the entire conference. If an older version of Wilson had stayed in Denver on his original Seattle contract, he would have cost over $50 million a year well into his late 30s. That kind of window slammed shut quickly, but the window for Nix is just starting to open. The big takeaway here isn't that you should never trade for a veteran QB. The real lesson is that the contract you sign the second a player arrives before he even takes a snap or fits into the locker room is the decision that dictates your entire future. Every front office that sits down to negotiate with the quarterback over the next decade is going to remember exactly what happened to the Denver Broncos. So there you have it. Click on the button if you haven't already to watch the next video. And thanks for watching.